You're listening to The Leonard Lopate Show on AM 820 and 93.9 WNYC.
When he was in the Senate, Mike Gravel became nationally known for his attempts in 1971 to end the draft during the Vietnam War and for having put the Pentagon Papers into the public record. A year later, he conducted an unusual campaign for the Democratic nomination for vice president, and in 1973, he played a crucial role in getting congressional approval for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. He was defeated in a bid for a third term in 1980, and then this year he made an unsuccessful run, or two runs, in fact, for a presidential bid, both as a Democrat and as a Libertarian. And he tells his story in an autobiography with the help of investigative journalist Joe Lauria called A Political Odyssey, The Rise of American Militarism and One Man's Fight to Stop It. It's published by Seven Stories Press, and I'm delighted that it has brought Mike Gravel and Joe Lauria to the show today. Hi. Mike, did you ever worry that speaking your mind might cost you politically? Do you ever look back and say, what was I thinking?
No. When I look back, I just wish in many respects I had been tougher than I was. I felt the peer pressure, which is really the real difficult part of being a senator, because you're not a member of the club. Your own staff is telling you, well, Senator, please cool it, be more like other senators. And now when I look back and recognize that everything that I did in the first 4 years of my tenure.
But you also must have had the back of your mind the fact that you were elected initially because Ernest Gruening had voted against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. He was being punished for doing something that many people later felt was the right thing to do.
And I felt it was the right thing to do. In point of fact, I wrote him a letter when he voted against Tonkin, congratulating him. If he knew that that letter was in his files, he could have probably exhibited that. When I ran against Ernest, he had really opposed me when I ran for the House 2 years before that, which was very disappointing because I was a protege of his. And so he had turned on me. So I felt that 2 years later, all bets were off. I could run against him. He was in his 80s. I was 38. I felt it was time to change the guard.
Were Alaskans voting for more liberal candidates in those days?
Not necessarily. All I had to do was stand right next to Ernest, and people assumed that I was more to the right than Ernest. What they found out, and which was in order to not to my benefit, was, in point of fact, I was every bit as opposed to the war, and in some circles was viewed more liberal than Ernest Gruening was. And I say more liberal. I was always a classic liberal. Ernest was a New Deal liberal, and there's a difference.
Joe, you get equal billing on this book with Mike, which would suggest, because usually in these kinds of books, as told to, the other name is a little smaller.
Yeah.
What role did you play in this to get equal billing?
Mike's laughing. Maybe he could answer that too.
Well, I had to fight. The first iteration of the cover, you needed a magnifying glass to find Joe's name. And Joe, of course, was incensed, but I was equally incensed. He did more work on this book than I did. I mean, I was just a passive. He's just on my case for over a year, and the style of writing was his. I've written a book, but this is his style. And so I was absolutely angry with the publisher. I said, look, at this thing goes nowhere unless Joe's name is the same size as my name. So that's why I'm laughing. And so they gave him equal billing, and he deserves equal billing.
So is this really as much your book as it is Mike's?
Well, frankly, when I met Mike in February or March of 2006, we had a breakfast at the Waldorf Astoria. He told me he was going to run for president, and that breakfast turned into lunch. And I realized I was sitting with an American politician with whom I agreed with on virtually everything. So in a sense, it was very easy to me to write this book because my ideas and Mike's are so similar that it was mine and his.
And you're not concerned about repertorial objectivity when you do
Well,
something like this?
I am. Of course I am. And I think that's why it's very important that this book is not portrayed as just simply a memoir, because it's really only partly that. And I use that as a vehicle. We use that as a vehicle to tell the larger story of the history of American military industry and how it's related to government and the expansion of U.S. territory and presidential power as it grew over the years. And that's really the guts of the book. And Mike's life collides. There are two stories, that one and Mike's story. They collide in the 70s when he goes to the Senate.
And many of the themes of that time now seem to be repeating themselves.
Worse. They're not only repeating, they're worse.
Well, in one of the presidential debates this year, you said that the other candidates frightened you. What did you mean by that?
Very simply, because it's politics as usual. They're all tied into American imperialism. And American imperialism supports the whole concept of the military-industrial complex, the control of our economic society by Wall Street, and all of what that represents. And that is the undoing of our society, which has been totally militarized.
Why do you think that message didn't resonate during the primaries?
Because our culture has been militarized. That's why it didn't resonate, and because the mainstream media did not permit it to be. There's another book I have out with a professor at Columbia. It's called The Kingmakers, and that is that mainstream media is the echo chamber of the White House.
But then you switched to the Libertarian Party, and you came in fourth among their candidates. Bob Barr, a very conservative former senator, is the Libertarian candidate. How did the two of you wind up going for the same spot?
Well, first off, I'm very happy that I didn't get the nomination. I was, for the same reason I ran for the Democratic presidential nomination. It was the same one that I ran for the Libertarian. First off, it was easy to go as a Libertarian. I am a classic liberal, one. Two, the Libertarian Party is not a war party. The Democratic Party is a war party. Make no mistake about that. So is the Republican Party. Those two parties control our American society, the polity. They control the government. And they are war parties. And that's, of course, what sustains the military-industrial complex.
Well, you've said the military is the nation's top priority. Don't we need a strong military to protect us from our enemies, especially in this post-9/11 era?
Well, what enemies? I don't know of any enemies. When I was asked in the debate, who are your enemies?
Well, we had the World Trade Towers are gone.
No, that's Al-Qaeda. What
They're not enemies?
Al-Qaeda is an enemy. Sure, it's a criminal force. So you don't call it a war. When you use the terminology war, with that you're able to sustain unlimited funding for a military-industrial complex and a homeland security complex, both of which are unauditable, meaning you don't know where the money goes and you don't know how much you're spending on it. It's a fool's errand. Sure, we need a security, but we spend more on defense than all the rest of the world put together. This is ridiculous.